Hey everybody, it's Dr. May. How are you? I hope you're doing good. I'm glad to be with you today to do the first of two parts for lesson 8 for radically open DBT. Okay, so this is some pretty interesting stuff and I hope you like it. Let me pull this up for us here. Okay, so it's called Tribe Matters. Okay, so if you've noticed so far in radically open DBT, they like to kind of go back to our ancient human roots to explain why we are the way we are, especially why we really need connection. We need each other, okay? Because when we started out as humans, we lived in tribes, and there's still people around the world that live in tribes. But even if you just, live in the suburbs or the city, we still really need each other, okay? And we're wired up to need this connection. So this one's gonna be talking about our tribal roots and why connection's important, why rejection is so painful, right? And how self-conscious emotions, including shame, guilt, embarrassment, and humiliation, arise in response to rejection. Okay, so this video is going to kind of set up that background. And then the next video for lesson 8 is going to talk about like the coping strategy for all this. Okay, which is flexible mind, SAGE. Okay, but let's get started with this one. Okay, so benefits of the tribe, right? So why are we tribal creatures? Because we can't really survive on our own, pretty much. Okay, and when we're connected to each other, it really brings us all safety and survival, okay? So one of the things that happen in our tribe is that there's a communication that's important, right? So there's emotions that help us communicate, there's verbals and behaviors that help us communicate, right? And that's very important for us to know what's going on with each other. There's a sense of safety in numbers, right? So if we confronted other animals, let's say, or the wild or other tribes, it's important for us to have more than just a few of us, and that helps, right? And when we're together, there's a possibility for teamwork, right? So if we had to capture that big woolly mammoth for food for the tribe, it's going to be hard to do it by yourself, right? You need a bunch of other people to get together and to, make the kill, so to speak, okay? So the teamwork helps us to accomplish certain tasks and meet our goals, right, for survival or otherwise, and to overcome important obstacles to get to those goals, right? It also helps to have multiple people because we share resources with each other, right? So maybe I have certain kinds of resources that you need and you have stuff that I need and we trade with each other, right? Because we can't all do all of it. And also, when we're connected in our tribe, we bond together, okay? And how do we bond? By making ourselves vulnerable and sharing our vulnerability and knowing and trusting that the other person's gonna not use our vulnerability against us. And that's how we build trust, right? So we have to be open with ourselves, share a bit of ourselves with each other, and then hopefully get a caring response. And that creates the bond and the affection and the intimacy, right? Important for child rearing, important for friendships, for marriage, couples, things like that. I guess back then there may not have been marriage, I don't know. But you know what I'm saying, right? So all this stuff is important in the tribe, okay? Whether ancient tribes or modern tribes. Okay, so the manual offers this quote to us. So the quote is, "I awoke to the sound of drums and I knew I was finally home." Okay, so drumming was a big part of tribes and still is. And it's kind of just that sense of belonging, that sense of ritual or some kind of sign that we're all in this together, okay? And there's certain aspects of our culture or our belonging that gives us the signal that we're belonging and we're home, okay? So it's kind of a nice quote. So anyway, so we keep talking about tribe. So what does tribe actually mean, okay? So on the smallest level, a tribe can mean 2 people, okay? We could have a very, very small tribe or a very large tribe with multiple people, okay? And they say that, excuse me, I'm gonna move my little picture window there. Tribal bonds begin when 2 people commit to make sacrifices for the other person when they're in distress without expecting anything in return, right? So in that picture, one person's holding an umbrella for another, right? So you're doing something to help the other person altruistically, right? And although there's like the survival of the fittest thing could mean like, through competition, I'm going to win out and survive. There's actually a lot of altruism, a lot of helpfulness that's necessary to keep a tribe going, okay? And if you think about it, we need to help each other to survive, okay? So intimacy plus commitment equals social safety, right? So when we're connected and close and we commit to be loyal to each other, that makes us feel safe, okay? So that's all part of being in a tribe. Um, Tribes are built around shared values and goals. So if you think about it, we're all in kind of multiple tribes, kind of like that picture on the bottom. So, you know, I might be in a tribe at work, you know, with my treatment team and my ward, or I might be a tribe in terms of my family, or maybe in an organization and that's a separate tribe, right? Or maybe I joined a sport and the people on my team is a separate tribe. Okay, so we're all probably part of different types of tribes. Even our being a member of our state or a country is a kind of a very, very large type of tribe, or our religion, right? So, and each of those organizations have a sense of values and goals that are shared, okay? Um, and tribal groups, in theory, expect members to make self-sacrifices for the common good, right? So we're thinking about not just ourselves, but the group as a whole and what's good for the group as a whole, okay? And people often belong to many tribes, as I said. So, you know, each tribe might be a little bit different in terms of their rules and the members, but these are some general principles that operate in all of them, okay? All right, so here's another quote that the manual offers to us. Lonely apes die. Okay, so what does that mean? We can't do it alone, okay? We really need each other, literally, to survive, okay? Poor little ape, he looks so sad, right? Okay, so because lonely apes die, because we can't survive alone, we're naturally wired to want connection and fear social exclusion, right? So because it's so dangerous, it makes sense that we would have some kind of emotional signal saying, wait a minute, this is no good. It's not good to be left out. You got to do something about it, right? So that's what that emotional response is for, okay? So literally banishment from the tribe was a death sentence. Like if you were that guy in the woods on the bottom all by yourself, it would be pretty tough, right? All right. So because it's so dangerous to be alone and to be excluded, we're also hardwired to be on the lookout for cues in the environment that we could be possibly excluded, right? So we're kind of like sitting there with our little binocular, our social binoculars, looking out for cues that maybe someone doesn't like me, right? Maybe there's something wrong, okay? So if you're one of those people that are always thinking, you know, taking things personally, that's partly why, you know, because we're wired up to look for these little signals, okay? So we're tuning into things such as like the way people's voice tone is, their expression, the thing they say, the way they behave. Because what if it's a signal that I'm being left out? Because I got to do something about it. Okay, so we're likely to interpret even neutral things as possible signs of social exclusion because, from a survival point of view, it made more sense to do that than to assume it meant nothing. Okay, so that's why we're maybe a little more apt to be negative about things. All right, so does that make sense? All right, I hope so. Okay, here's another thing, right? We're so literally, brain is wired up to be afraid of rejection that the pain centers in our brain get activated when we feel rejected. And the part that for social rejection is right next to the part, I'm sorry, the part for social pain is right next to the part in your brain for physical pain. They're right next to each other. So it almost literally pains you physically when you feel rejected, right? It hurts. And there's a reason for that, right? Because it's dangerous to our survival. We got pain's a signal, right? That we need to fix something. Okay, so no wonder rejection hurts, right? It's not just you. All right, so when we feel rejected, right, we have these emotional signals, like I was saying. So the four main emotional signals are categorized as self-conscious emotions, okay? So these include shame, guilt, humiliation, and embarrassment, okay? So shame is the most intense, embarrassment is the least intense, all right? And sometimes socially, you know, we kind of interchange these words, but they actually all mean something a little bit different, okay? So I'm gonna go over with you some of the different nuances of these four different emotions, okay? Just so we're a little bit more clear. Okay, so let's start with the least, you know, intense. So embarrassment is the least intense. So when you're embarrassed, you know, it's kind of like a little uncomfortable. It's like fleeting though. You know, it's like, you know, you're gonna get over it quickly, right? So if I I'm walking across the room and I trip over my shoelaces. You know, I might be a little embarrassed about it because, you know, I made a mistake. I'm walking funny. I almost fell on my face, you know, so I might laugh about it, you know, kind of like the woman in the picture. I might be like, oh my God, what a doofus, right? But I know it's like, I'm not the only one because I've seen other people do that before. It doesn't make me something wrong with me because we all kind of do this stupid stuff sometimes, right? So you know you're not alone, but you feel a little embarrassed about it, okay? Humiliation's a little more intense. So let's say you're that woman in the picture. Let's say you're Muslim and you're wearing a hijab and you're in a coffee shop and some people start laughing at you. And no one likes to be laughed at or made fun of or, you know, made to feel bad. But let's say, you know, you're proud of your faith and you're proud of your decision to wear a hijab, right? And you know it's not right what these people are doing to you. So you know that it's wrong and you feel like you didn't deserve it, but it still feels a little bit bad. Okay, so that's humiliation. All right, so let's focus a little bit more on guilt and shame because there's a little bit more to it, right? So guilt is a little less intense than shame, okay? So when you feel guilty, it's because of something you did. So you feel like I did something wrong, right? If you feel shame, you feel like there's something wrong with me, right? It's deeper. You feel like at the core, maybe there's something wrong with me, right? So that's a little more intense, right? So next, there's also a difference between who you imagine you disappointed, right? So when you feel guilty, you feel like you didn't live up to your own values, right? So let's say I lied to somebody and I felt guilty about it, right? But I generally like to consider myself to be an honest person. So I let myself down because I violated my own values by lying. Okay, so I might feel guilty about that lie that I told, even though deep down I know I'm an okay person, but I made a mistake that I'm not really happy about. So that's guilt, okay? Shame's a little deeper. So shame is like not just what you think about yourself. You're imagining yourself or actually seeing yourself through the eyes of your tribe, so to speak, right? So see in that picture, there's a guy sitting in a room, but through his rear view mirror, so to speak, he imagines the other members of his tribe looking at him and judging him. Okay, sometimes it actually happens. Like there's real people in your life that are shaming you, that are making you feel like not only did you violate the tribal norms, but there's something wrong with you, right? So you've probably had that experience somewhere along the line when people were like criticizing you, making you feel like you're a terrible person and what's wrong with you and why did you do that, right? So shame is more of a public emotion, right? So it involves disapproval by others, real or imagined, okay? Sometimes you could do something and no one said anything, but you could just imagine people criticizing you. Maybe in part because you've had similar experiences before, right? So it involves disapproval by others following public exposure of failings or violations of tribal norms. So it could be real public exposure or imagined public exposure. So you could just picture what would happen if someone were to find out and feel shame. Or someone could actually find out something that you did that was inappropriate and they could shame you, okay? But it's pretty much, the difference is private for guilt, public for shame, okay? All right. There's also a difference in the way people make repairs. So they say that, you know, guilt is a more recently evolved emotion, and it's not, there's actually no real affect that's associated with guilt. There's no clear body language and expression. So when people repair a guilt, they tend to do it a little bit more superficially or symbolically. So for example, you might say, I'm sorry, or you might offer someone a gift as a repair, you know, and that's a little bit more symbolic to say, here, to get back in your good graces, you know, I'm going to offer this to you. Okay. Shame, there's more of a hardwired emotion, affect, body language attached to it. Okay. There's clearly a visceral distress, like you feel it in your body. Okay. And there's also, it prompts you to do what they call gestures of appeasement, right? So let's say you fell out of the good graces of your tribe. Let's say you did something that was violating the tribal norms, okay? You did something really egregious. And now you feel shame, as you should, probably, because you did something wrong, or you feel like, oh my God, this is awful, or you were made to feel that way. So the shame prompts you to appease the tribe to let you back in their good graces, right? So it kind of like signals non-dominance by lowering your head and, avoiding eye contact and, making yourself small so that you could say, listen, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, right? And it kind of puts you back in the good graces of the tribe, okay? So more about that in the next part 2 of lesson 8, okay? Okay, so ultimately, like I said before, so shame is the most powerful and painful of the 4 self-conscious emotions. So essentially, it's it's the painful feeling that I'm deeply flawed. Like there's something really wrong with me. It's kind of like the burden of those blocks on top of that person's back. Like I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. Nobody loves me. There's something wrong with me, right? And because of that, you're not worthy of being loved and cared for and included in the tribe. Okay, so that's why it's so painful. Okay, but ultimately, the reason why we have shame is because it evolved for the survival of the entire tribe, right? And it evolved to punish extremely harmful acts that could damage tribal survival. Okay, so out in the old days, if you're just out in the wilderness, if someone did something that's damaging to the tribe, that's not good for anybody, right? So shame is designed to help us correct that in some way, right? In terms of our evolution, all right? So what are some examples of really bad stuff? So deceiving other tribal members for personal gain, such as stealing, lying, cheating, exploiting, right? So all that stuff could be shamed by the tribe because it's not good for the whole tribe. Also, engaging in behavior that threatens the well-being of the entire tribe, such as like if there was a guard that was on the lookout for predators and he fell asleep on his watch. No good, right? Or someone encouraging infighting among tribal members, right? Which could, create chaos in the tribe and, and that's really not good either, right? So let's say that these are ancient examples of things that would, damage tribal survival, and these are things that were shamed by the tribe. Okay. However, in our time right now, sometimes we have that shame response at times when it's not necessary, So most shame is actually unwarranted. Most shame that we're feeling right now is not really helpful. It's probably more damaging than good, okay? And what happens is, we almost like make a mountain out of a molehill. Like something that is kind of minor, we make it into a big deal and therefore we feel shame about it. Okay, and sometimes other people make us to feel that way. So for example, here's an example of how it could be unwarranted. So like on the left, it says, our past can influence our present. So let's say you were shamed because you were growing up a certain way. Your parents shamed you for something. You were abused in some way. And now you're full of shame. And some minor trigger happens right now that reminds you of that. You could all of a sudden be flooded with shame about this current thing. But the current thing could be really small, but because it reminds you of something bad in the past, it brings up feelings of shame. And ultimately, the way you might have been shamed in the past was also unwarranted. You might have been made to feel shameful about something that really wasn't that bad. You didn't pick up your underwear off the floor. How dare you? What's wrong with you? Right? And now you forget something on the floor and someone's making you feel bad. And you're like, oh my God, I'm a horrible person. But is it really that bad? Right? So we're making mountains into molehills. We also sometimes misperceive neutral social signals, which may not mean anything at all, as high intensity disapproval. So when we read this high intensity disapproval on the face of other people or in the actions of other people, we start to assume I must have done something really, really wrong, right? But sometimes, it really wasn't that wrong. So the shame was unwarranted, okay? Other times we overreact to something that's like kind of a minor social transgression. So there's Garfield letting out a giant burp. Maybe it's not so polite, you prefer not to do that, but it's not the end of the world, right? Something like that would probably call more for embarrassment, which is much less intense than something like shame, which means like, oh, this is awful, right? So we sometimes overreact and bring in shame where it's not really necessary, okay? All right. So for whatever the reason, right? What social signals trigger self-conscious emotions? So that would include all these 4 as a whole. So embarrassment, humiliation, guilt, and shame. So we could read the social signals of other people and then start to feel these self-conscious emotions. So how does this work? Well, I'm going to tell you. Okay. So most intense would be overt rejection signals. So really clear signals from other people that they're rejecting you and what you did in some way. So how do we know that? One, disgust eye rolls. So someone's like, it's a clear sign they're feeling disgusted about what you did. Okay. Lip curling or jeering. Sarcastic voice tone. Ew, what's the matter with you? Hissing or booing, very, very obvious. Heckling and rude gestures, like the guy on the right. Also, and I couldn't find another picture for this or find the room, but taunting laughter and pointing, like, oh, look at him, like kids do, or even spitting. Okay, so these are all considered overt rejection signals. So a strong sign that you could take to feel, oh my God, I must have violated the tribal norms in some way. Okay. Other times, it's just an absence or low frequency of pro-social signals, right? So not getting something could feel like you did something wrong. So let's look at the girl on the left, right? So let's say the guy's talking to her, and it's hard to read what's really going on in her mind, right? So she's not giving eyebrow wags and going, oh yeah, right, yeah, oh sure, like, and making him feel like comfortable, right? Maybe she's not smiling when he's smiling, reciprocal smiling, or laughing when he's saying something funny. So he's starting to think, oh, what's going on here? Lack of facial affect or expression. She kind of has a blank face, so it's kind of hard to read what she's really thinking. So maybe he's reading into it and thinking, oh, this must not be good, right? Lack of pro-social touching, right? So when you're feeling a social engagement system is operating, you're feeling comfortable, you tend to like lightly touch people sometimes and stuff like that. So let's say there's no touching. She's kind of curled back here. And there's a low frequency of open-handed gestures, which is a sign of openness, or expansive gestures, which is a sign of social safety and comfort. So when you're not getting these things, remember I said before, you can interpret the neutral as possibly being negative. It's very easy to want to twist it around and say, oh, geez, I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'm being rejected, okay? But if you confronted the person on it, it's easy for them to deny because they're not doing anything. That's the tricky part. All right. Next, if we get low intensity or ambiguous rejection signals, okay? So here it's like, it's not as intense as these, okay? But, there is some signs that people aren't too happy with us, okay? So we're kind of wondering about what this is all about. So someone might be looking at us with a furrowed brow, kind of like, they're listening and, then you're not sure if they're approving or what they're thinking about. A flat facial expression, blank stare. So it's hard to read any emotion and know what that means. A frown or compressed lips, slight turning of the body or shoulders away from someone, right? When you feel really engaged with someone, you're turning toward, but if someone's turning a little away, it might feel a little rejecting, like they're pulling away from you. Also, yawning or closing your eyes when someone's talking or voicing their opinion, like the woman on the right. Could mean they're tired, but you wonder if they're feeling bored, right? If you ever talk to an audience and you see that, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, right? All right, other signals, because I can't find pictures for every single thing, right? Okay, an expressionless tone of voice. Like if someone's talking very flat, they don't seem that enthused about what you're saying. What they call a burglar smile or smirk when you're talking about your, talking about your opinion or saying what you want to say. So a burglar smile is like kind of a very small smile, and it's hard to really read what it means, like a Mona Lisa smile, like, hard to interpret, right? Changing the topic or interrupting someone when they try to speak. It could be the other person's really just excited about what they have to say, or you might take it to mean like they don't want to listen to what I have to say. Hard to tell. Failing to acknowledge someone when he or she walks into the room, right? You make certain circumstances, you may take that like, wow, they're not even noticing me. Ugh. Right? Okay, so these are kind of, see how it's ambiguous, like you could really be taken a few different ways. All right, so sometimes, it really may not mean anything bad, right? So if, let's say there's someone folding his arms across his chest when you're talking, it could mean he's annoyed with you, or it could mean he's cold, right? Or maybe that's just a comfortable stance for him. He always folds his arms, right? It's hard to tell. Sometimes it's a sign something else is going on with the person. Like let's say they're not fully paying attention to you. Maybe they're just preoccupied with something. Maybe there's something else on their mind that has nothing to do with you, right? Or maybe the person's even in pain. Like if someone has a headache and they're not making great eye contact, or they're really tired and they're yawning, that might just have to do with their own physiology rather than you. Okay, so sometimes it's hard to know what's really going on. You know, sometimes we could check, but the person may not be honest. It's a little tricky, right? Other times, you know, it might actually mean rejection. There's a chance the person could be rejecting you and showing kind of like subtle signals. All right, so the person might really disapprove, dislike, or envy you. And sometimes, you know, they may want to show it more overtly, but then they try to like, you know, tighten it up a little bit. And so you're just seeing a little bit leaking out. So it really kind of depends, right? So sometimes maybe they're even trying to, you know, get an advantage over you or signal to someone else in the room that they're annoyed with you. It could be some interesting things going on. But ultimately, it really can mean both things. You can't just be convinced that it means something bad, right? Okay, so we're coming to the end of this part. So the next video, okay, just to tantalize you about that. So it's going to be like, regardless of the cause, right? Regardless of whatever these social signals and triggers were, how will we cope now with these self-conscious emotions that are triggered, right? So when I'm feeling embarrassed, humiliated, guilty, shameful, how do I know they're justified? How do I know how to manage this? You know, how do I get back in the good graces of my tribe? Well, you're going to find out. Okay, so stay tuned for the second part of lesson 8. And we're going to go over Flexible Mind Sage, which has a ton of information about all of that. Okay, so hope this is helpful, enlightening you about the tribe a little bit. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. All right, bye everybody.